if the prospect of throwing a 10-pound medicine ball over your head is like scary to you, or like makes you worried that you're going to hurt yourself,
you shouldn't be in the Army.
Yeah, I'm worried about you, right? Like, you are fragile.
Yeah.
Right. And we should train in a way that gets rid of that fragility first.
So are we live?
Yep.
We might get taken down for this, but you know this song, don't you?
You know there's better ways to add music than holding your cell phone up to your microphone, right?
I know, but this is raw. I hope that gets picked up. Team, this week we're talking about changes. I've had that ready to go for a few hours.
For the audience, we did not discuss that.
No.
High tech.
I forgot I was going to do that until we started going. Here we are.
Oh man. Okay. Which changes are we discussing, Drew?
Well, let's do it. Let's do this. So we had Command Sergeant Major on.
Harris.
Thank you, Command Sergeant Harris. I knew that, by the way. And we in the closer, I believe we talked about how we were going to talk about the latest news coming out of embedded human performance, and this is that episode. So people have been, I think, wanting to hear what Drew and Alex have to say about this, and so
yeah, and I think we're going to flip it in terms of like the order of topics we address and how much time we spend on them compared to Sergeant Major Harris. With him, we spent a lot of time talking sex-neutral combat standards. What does it mean to change from the Army Combat Fitness Test to the Army Fitness Test? Medium amount of time on standing power throw, why it got removed. And then like a real brief touch on some broader things like the athletic trainer issue. We're going to cover those exact three topics in this episode.
Unhinged.
I think we're going to spend most of our time, or at least we're going to start with athletic trainers, because I think for this particular audience, the people who listen to this podcast, it's a pretty hot topic, even if the Army leadership hasn't quite recognized yet how big a deal it is.
Correct. And disclaimer, I, in my full-time capacity, work in H2F as a program director, directly employing athletic trainers. So this is something that I get to live with every single day.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know this for sure. I'd have to go back and check. There's smarter people on contracting than me. But we should be clear that the Drew does not employ athletic trainers, and there is no employer-employee relationship between the Army and the athletic trainers, and that is the nature of non-personal service work. Technically, Drew's just the recipient of some services.
Yes, and that hasn't always been the case. And this, I think, again, kind of same thing you just said. There's people out there that know more about this than we do, but the athletic training contract started as a personal services contract, which we talked about a while back when we had our contracting episode. Yeah.
I know we did the whole contracting episode, but like that stuff.
This is early H2F. It was personal services contract.
During the pilot?
The first couple of years I was there. I mean, it only switched about a year or so, maybe more, to a non-personal services contract, which is what I think kind of set the stage for some of this, because that was when I first started hearing rumblings about DHA, Defense Health Agency, having issues with athletic trainers. And
not to rehash the whole contracting episode we did, because I think we were better prepared to talk about that topic at the time, but it's worth people understanding, like, personal services contracts are when the nature of the work makes it appear like there is an employer-employee relationship. And you're not supposed to do those other than under certain exceptions. The most notable exceptions are special operations and medical. General purpose human performance, like something like H2F, does not have an exception for that. And that is part of our situation here.
Correct. Which is, for people, I think most people recognize that now, but I know when the athletic training cuts, like that news got kicked around, there was a lot of people were pissed because why can SOCOM do this and we can't? I mean, that's the exact reason. SOCOM has an exception for this to be a personal services contract, which makes them exempt from some of the DHA stuff. Now, my question, I don't know if you can answer this or somebody, why the shit does Big Army not have that exemption? I don't know.
This is kind of the whole athletic trainer story leads to a conversation about how many people need to care and how much do they need to care and who has the power to change policy, because that's what this is. Like, getting this problem completely solved is as simple as a policy change, but policy changes aren't easy. You have to get a lot of people to care about it for a long enough time that it reaches the threshold of like, this is something we actually need to, in some cases, pass laws about, like get something into legislation. Sometimes it's just DoD level policy, but even at that level, that requires somebody at a high level to champion the cause. It's not that easy. So I think we should probably back up. I think we should address the common but wrong reasons I've heard trying to explain this AT situation, mostly on LinkedIn. I think that's where a lot of this dialogue tends to be happening. I don't think some of the other social media platforms are really talking about this as much. I've heard that it's about money, that we're like cutting funds. That we can explicitly say is not the case. Like, it's clear in the official statement, in the email from the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army that went out explaining what's going on, that the money is still there. They're just moving it from this contract over to the strength and conditioning coach contract to provide more coaches, which is a little bit ironic because they recently cut the number of coaches. We'll get into double speak in a second, because I think that's at the root of a lot of this. I also don't think it is about anybody questioning the value of athletic trainers. Like, ROI data is there, like internal data that H2F has briefed at their annual symposium, as well as like peer-reviewed research. I've posted some before. I can throw them in the show notes here. We mentioned a little bit with Sergeant Major Harris, but there's research across Air Force, Army, Marine Corps showing that when you embed athletic trainers in these scenarios, it saves more money than it costs. Like, it works. It's good. So that's pretty straightforward. I think we can knock those two out. People believe that the intervention works. You even heard Sergeant Major Harris say it when he was on the podcast. He was like, I was a Sergeant Major for, I think he was a battalion or brigade or something like that, when they embedded initial entry training athletic trainers, and it worked. Like, then he said something about there's like not enough athletic trainers available. That feels made up, but we'll set that aside. We'll not really worried about it.
It's like, what?
Given that like we are employing them now and they don't want to leave, like they want this to continue. I think there are, and like, getting big picture for a second, a program as big as H2F, like something like this across the conventional army of 1 million people, changes an industry.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It legitimately does. It changes how many jobs are available. It changes how many internships should be available. It changes what pay expectations are. And so entering a space, hiring hundreds of people, and then exiting that space has significant professional ramifications for entire career fields. And when they're career fields that have entry-level graduate degree requirements, has impacts on a lot of universities. Yeah.
I'll put it this way, at risk of the people that I work for getting upset with me. I've been in tactical human performance for over 10 years. This is the dumbest shit I've ever seen in my life. Like, I'm sorry. And I thought about how I was going to talk about this, because I knew we were going to have this conversation. And like I said, I deal with this every day at work. H2F has been around for a number of years now. And even beyond that, embedded human performance has been around for decades. And the metric that always gets touted at symposiums, in research, on social media, it all has to do with access to care and return to duty.
Mm-hmm.
We speak about PT tests a lot, and that's great, but that's such a weird world in and of itself. The thing that so many people care about is access to care, how quickly you can be seen, and return to duty, how quickly you can become operational again. The profession that is most closely tied to that is the athletic training profession. So all of the things that we have listened to senior leaders talk about at these symposiums, on these platforms, about how this is such a great, like, oh my God, I wish we had this when I was a private or when I was a lieutenant. Like, they are speaking directly about the impact that athletic trainers have had. The strength coaches are awesome. The physical therapists are awesome. The cognitive performance specialists, everybody who's involved in these in this profession is awesome. It's the athletic trainers who are typically the first ones on the so-called, quote unquote, scene to treat acute injuries, to then shuffle those soldiers, airmen, Marines into more long-term care and then monitor them when they get back to the line. So I take issue with it for a number of reasons. Number one, it feels as though, and I know that there probably has been a fight. Some people will get mad at me for even talking about this, but it feels as though we're sort of throwing up our hands and being like, "Oh, sucks, can't do anything about it." And to your point, it is simply a policy change. And I get frustrated, I think, when, and I've said this before in other forums, you hear all of these folks talk about people first, people first, people first. We care about the soldiers. We're investing in the soldiers, yada, yada, yada. Like, this is that investment. And so you would think that when you needed to go to bat for that, it would be more of a fight. And I know you and I both know people in the background who have been fighting this for a long time, and fair play to those guys. But to think that we can move this entire profession away and replace them with strength coaches, and then the other thing I've seen is replace them with medics, is just like, it's asinine, it's ill-informed, and like, I think most importantly, it's dangerous. Like, I think I don't remember his post off the top of my head, but like Nate Palin, shout out Nate, friend of the program, had a great post about like, I wouldn't have my athletic trainers doing medic shit. I don't want my medic people doing athletic. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
And to be clear, if you had to choose one to do the others, like the amount of training medics get, and like respect to medics, and there are like higher tiers
For sure.
where they get more and more training. But for like a generic 68 whiskey, the amount of medical training is measured in like hours.
Mm-hmm.
Athletic training is an entry-level master's degree program. And this is something I should have said up top, because I don't think everybody really understands what athletic trainer is. It's a weirdly named profession. Yeah. And like, if anybody out there is in a position of power to like consider renaming the profession, possibly worthwhile. Cause like athletic trainer sounds a lot like personal trainer. I don't know what I'd call it. I have no idea. But what I can tell you is that a ton of people are confused, because athletic trainer, strength coach, and personal trainer all sound interchangeable.
I've heard a lot of senior leaders think athletic trainers and strength coaches are the same thing.
They absolutely do.
Which was my first reaction when I saw the news that they were being swapped. I was like, somebody thinks they're the same thing, which is
and ridiculous. I can tell you, the news came from General Mingus, and I do not think General Mingus thinks they're interchangeable. I think General Mingus knows what athletic trainer is. I think he knows what's going on here. I don't think this was his decision. I think this was the consequence of some bigger stuff we're going to talk about in a second. But just so people understand, I think the easiest way to explain what an athletic trainer is, and it's not a perfect understanding of everything they're capable of, but if you're watching like NBA basketball or NFL football and a player gets injured and somebody rushes out to immediately evaluate them, determine the severity of the injury, take action if they can in the moment, refer to something more serious if they need to, that's an athletic trainer. Mm-hmm. Their specialty is managing like acute injuries. For the most part, they certainly get into chronic and things like that. And then they can do a lot of like low level interventions. They typically work under the license of a physician, similar to a physician's assistant. Like PAs in the Army work under the license of a physician. Now, the military is weird. PAs are much more autonomous in the military than they are in traditional medical settings. But like, that just proves that we have the model already. We could do it the same way for athletic trainers and solve the problem.
Why aren't they doing that? Do you know?
So this brings us to what the real problem is here.
Correct.
At the end of the day, and like I could be wrong. I don't know everything about the situation, but my reading of the situation is that this is a turf war between Department of the Army and Defense Health Agency. And it comes down to a few different political things. Whether we consider athletic trainers real allied health professionals. As I understand it, as of now, like DHA doesn't technically have like a credentialing pathway for them. There's not a role for them in Genesis. They operate under like different roles that are closely analogous, but not perfect for ATs. Oversight is an issue because H2F teams don't have a physician on them, and conversation for another day. But there's been background chatter about getting sports medicine MDs involved in human performance. Like if there was a division level sports medicine doctor, that would be the obvious person to provide that oversight of the ATs. Then there's the question of who has the authority to contract for medical services. If you're reading between the lines in General Mingus's email, it mentions that the Army wants to retain control of H2F. That indicates that the alternative was we keep athletic trainers, but DHA gains some degree of control over the program. And I don't think we want that. If you're not in the space, you're probably not involved in the conversations, but I don't know a lot of people who are big fans of the work DHA is doing in terms of military healthcare and provision of services. So I would say, and then credentialing and privileging is part of it. We mentioned that earlier. How does that work? Does that cost resources? I have only managed medical professionals for a very small amount of time in a very limited capacity, but it doesn't seem like ability to handle credentialing and privileging through an MTF is that big a rate limiter. Like, I don't think they're swamped with credentialing stuff. It doesn't sound like it's that hard, but maybe it is, and maybe we need some kind of agreement or resource sharing stuff to navigate that. But ultimately, this is a conversation about where the boundary is between human performance and medical. And I think everybody thought H2F was going to fail early on, and I think H2F has succeeded more than people thought. And I think DHA wants to own a piece of it.
Why, though? Like, to what end? Like, because then you get into and I know I rant about this quite a bit, but you get into sort of the profits versus people thing. Like, if you go to any of these websites, I mean, I have Defense Health Agency's website pulled up right now. Like, Defense Health Agency is a joint integrated combat support agency that enables blah, 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 to provide a medically ready force and ready medical force to combat commands. Like, that is literally what H2F is doing. Like,
but I think DHA, well, one, DHA probably doesn't love that somebody who's not DHA is doing something that is DHA's mission, right? Like, we don't all love different people playing in our sandboxes. And then two, I think there's a MOPS and MOS problem of ideally everybody be on the same page and we're trying to create this medically ready force. But sometimes we measure MOPS instead of MOS, and a MOP for DHA is like provision of care, like RVU style measurement. How much care are we providing, billable hours, all that kind of stuff. And if there's provision of care happening outside of DHA's ability to capture it and claim credit for it, then there's medical dollars being spent in a way that is not conducive to evaluations of DHA as an organization.
right. So it's a money thing. Like, in this, yeah. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. And this is where I know I've gotten chewed out before for being this blunt, but like, they are saying that they would rather get the money than help the soldiers.
I'd say that's part of it. I think it's money /
credit.
Like, like bureaucratic wrangling, who's succeeding. Yeah.
It's just insane to me.
Growing your own organization. Yeah.
Right. It's just insane to me that you could look at a report that shows the return on investment that athletic trainers have provided to the force. You could look at that and see that and objectively track that across years and know that it is working. And then say, nah, fuck that. I'd rather make more money and get more credit.
And I think that's the real doublespeak problem here. Cause like across H2F, I think there is a difference between what is being said about how awesome the program is at the highest level and what's being done to the resources of the program and the jobs in the program and the people in the program.
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's the cognitive dissonance.
Right. Which gets into, you mentioned this with strength coaches, like, and I am a strength coach. So the fact that more strength coach job opportunities are being created out of this, sure, call it a silver lining. It's just interesting to me, like you said, that we just cut the number of coaches. Now we're walking that back and we are trying to create more coaches when we're having issues filling the existing slots already.
And that cut was so that we could get H2F programs to more brigades faster.
Because
it's literally do more with less. It's spread the peanut butter thin. And I think I had a good conversation with about the fact that we have not done a good job of figuring out the dose response relationship between distinct H2F services and the outcomes that come from them, right? Like right now, either your unit has H2F or your unit doesn't have H2F. We don't track how many of different professions you have. We don't know whether the benefit is coming from coaches or ATs or PTs or RDs or OTs. We don't know what the appropriate ratio of those professions is. We're also not comparing brigades that maximally utilize their H2F to brigades that aren't utilizing it as well as they could. We don't know that. So right now we have this very binary, like you have H2F and you don't have H2F.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a dark path if you go too far down it, right? Of like, could we cut 50% of the current teams and still call it H2F? Could we cut 70% of the current teams and still call it H2F? Is it H2F with no medical providers and only coaches? Is it H2F with no coaches and only medical providers? Like that's we don't have, and like actually that's not true. For athletic trainers specifically, we actually do have the data because they've been embedded since before programs like this.
It is
So
the data.
that's the most deeply ironic part is I don't think decisions are actually getting made based on data.
No.
So
no
like
way.
the one profession that has done this like on their own, essentially, mostly in initial entry training settings, but not always. But like athletic trainers have produced return on investment without any of the other assets that make up one of these interdisciplinary teams. And ironically, they're the ones getting cut. That's terrible. Those dots didn't connect for me until just now, but
I mean, and I do want to just put this out into the ether because I know you and I have talked about like we'd love to have somebody from DHA on to sort of provide the counter argument. And I don't even think it needs to be DHA. I just want to throw out the invite to literally anybody who can create a compelling argument as to why this makes sense. I mean, I get all the time programs get cut, and you actually made a great point on Instagram the other day. It was a while back, but walk through your analogy about return on investment and human performance versus fixing airplanes.
So I've brought this up a few times. I've like used it in presentations before, but like the blunt bottom line take is that if they're asking for your return on investment data, it is because they don't believe your program works or is important or is necessary. And if you've been in the military, you understand this a little bit. If an Abrams tank is broken, it doesn't really matter what it costs to fix it. They're going to find the money because they've determined that Abrams tanks are a vital part of the mission. They don't ask for return on investment per tank, right? And I was in a Stryker unit, same situation with Strykers, like aviation unit, helicopters down. What does it cost to fix it? Okay, we get it. Like that's how much it costs, but that thing is important and we need it. This goes way back to our first episode with Newton Chang from Google. Google has a really cool health and performance program across the company. They have facilities, they have services, all these things. And we asked him, how does Google evaluate whether it works? And he said, they don't. They believe it works, so they don't waste time and effort tracking those things. They've looked at the data, they've looked at studies, they just bought in already. It's an important part of what they provide to their staff to make them maximally effective. And we just aren't there with human performance yet. We don't believe as an organization that humans deserve to be prioritized just as much as vehicles and weapon systems. We have to be convinced of that. Leaders have to constantly see data to believe it.
Let me interrupt you real quick because I think this goes to some of the feedback we've gotten from our episode with Command Sergeant Major
Harris. He has a name. His name is not Sergeant Major.
I was pausing to see if you would do that again. With Command Sergeant Major Harris. To your point, there seems to be this senior leader expectation that soldiers will just figure it out. Mm-hmm. Like they will just do it. I mean, and in his case, it was through the context of changing the standards and yada, yada, yada. Oh, soldiers, they'll just meet the standard because that's what they do. Like, dude, newsflash, if that were the case, we'd still have leg tucks. So I think that's where the rub for me is with the human performance piece and the return on investment piece, because there seems to just be this assumption that, oh yeah, even if we take all that stuff away, soldiers will just figure it out. It's like, well, if they had figured it out, we wouldn't have the data showing that we needed this service in the first place. So I don't think that the right answer is don't give a shit about the return on investment, because then you're just promoting like laziness and lack of data and all that kind of thing. But the fact that a program that is objectively working, arguably better than most of these types of programs, but the fact that the program is constantly held to the fire and made to show why it should even be there in the first place, I think is detrimental. That's the end of my rant.
And I think we're coming to the end of the athletic trainers portion of this thing. You'll probably hear more from us on this. We might try and get some guests on. Maybe somebody listening knows the right guest. I'll take a brief aside and say there's a colonel, soon to be retired, out there listening to this, I'm not going to say your name or what you do, but we've talked about you coming on and you thought about it and you said no. But I know you've been listening to the last couple episodes and I know it's making you want to come on. So like, call
Is
me.
this first name start with a J?
It does not, but
Oh,
that's okay.
different colonel.
Yeah, different colonel. But I'll also say that we were talking about the data and senior leaders needing it and things like that. I also don't think decisions are made based on data. I just don't.
Yeah.
I don't think they ever have been. I think data is used to justify decisions that are made based on stories and feelings. I think the program was created in the first place based on like trust and belief that it matters, and certain leaders in certain positions cared about it enough to make it happen in the moment. I think test events, test standards, all these things, like data is brought to those conversations and people hope that decisions are made based on data. And I just do not think that is the case. With the possible exception of a uniquely bad kind of decision where you look at historic scoring data, or even worse, you look at fitness test scoring from a pilot of a test where there were no consequences for failure, and you look at how many people would fail if you set the standard where you want to set it and you don't because too many people would fail. That's a horrible example of using data to make a decision. And that's the only kind of scenario where I think it actually happens. Is they're like, oh, we can't implement that standard because too many people would fail. Like that's, other than that, I think people like programs live and die based on compelling stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sucks, but it's the world we live in. That's what it is. So like
Yeah.
part of our job is to tell those stories.
Yeah. So just to close the athletic trainer piece, like you said, number one, this is not the end of the conversation for us. We're already talking about bringing some more people on. Which, number two, next point, if somebody out there wants to speak for the athletic trainers, that'd be phenomenal. If somebody wants to speak for DHA and help us understand this mess, that'd be great. In the show notes, we will have a link to one of the seemingly many petitions that people can sign to support the athletic trainers. I forget the exact number, but double-digit thousands of emails and things have been sent to Congress at this point. And for people who are just completely oblivious to what we're even talking about, the proposed cut for the athletic trainers is meant to take effect at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is October. I have not seen anything other than the email that was sort of released/leaked from General Mingus. So I don't know if there's an official memo, or I don't know what's going on in the background in terms of the contract companies pushing back on it or what have you. I will say that what I am afraid of is a situation where we lose ATs at the beginning of the fiscal year and there's a severe lag between when the strength coach billets get filled, and we end up in a world where we just have less people. And, again, we've got some time until October, but still, that seems to be the nature of the beast. So I don't know if you have any more closing remarks. I think it's a dumb decision. I can't wait to see what happens next.
The only thing I would add before we move on is that Drew mentioned it, tens of thousands of signatures and emails and all these things. Despite that, at the last time I checked, no actual congressional inquiry has started. And I have seen a few people get replies from members of Congress basically saying, oh, the Army's replacing them with strength coaches, so it's okay. So that like right now, members of Congress are just accepting the Army talking points and rolling with it. Nobody's decided it's enough of an issue to really dig into yet. Petitions are great. I think it's fine. Sign it if you want to. If you're listening to this podcast and you are a senior leader of whatever stripe, right? Like a senior sergeant major, maybe a battalion commander, maybe a brigade commander. I don't know who's listening. And you know the value of these folks. Like there was just an article on Army.mil last month from a battalion commander who pointed to a 37% reduction in injury, like from before athletic trainers to post athletic trainers for his battalion. Incredible. If you are somebody like that who has experienced it and is in a position of authority, channel those messages up through higher echelons of command. Because I think getting senior leaders to care about it is how we change this. And I don't think senior leaders are changing their mind based on petitions, at least quite yet. So that's all.
Or if you listen to this and you're a member of Congress.
Yeah. All of our senators and stuff listening.
Great shot. We're willing to waive rule number 1 if you're in Congress, maybe.
Check. Deal.
Okay. More to follow. Do you want to go standing power throw?
Yeah, I think this is a current events episode, and this is a big, hotly debated current event. Hopefully people listened to the Sergeant Major Harris episode, they heard the Army position on this, but the standing power throw is going away as we transition to the Army fitness test.
I missed a beautiful transition from the athletic trainer. Speaking of dropping the ball,
There it
let's
is.
let's go to the standing power throw.
And I will suggest, if you want to dive into the world of assessments, go back and listen to our episode with Chris Frankel.
Mhm.
I got him to rehash some content he presented at the NSCA Tactical Conference, where he explained a few of the many purposes of assessments, and he related them, so like camera, map, crystal ball, engine, as examples. So like a camera type assessment should be as accurate as possible, telling you the current fitness of a person, right? This means like construct validity of different components of fitness. That's what it should do. A map type of assessment, which our doctrine, and the first sentence you read, if you're taking an ACFT, the proctor of the test has to read you a script at the beginning, and I think it's the first sentence, maybe it's the second one, is the same as the script from the APFT for decades, which was the results of this assessment will be used by you and your commander to determine your physical training needs. That is a map type of assessment. It's going to help you chart the way forward. A coach should be able to program off of the results. Then crystal ball is predicting the future. That tends to be like trying to predict injuries with certain assessments. We've done force plate episodes, things like that. So some assessments are attempts to predict risk or predict outcomes. And finally, there's the engine, which is assessments create incentives, right? Lots of people suddenly do sprint, drag, carry stuff, deadlifts, standing power throw stuff, because we create an incentive to train that way. You're not supposed to train for the test, but we know it is a powerful motivator in the way people train. So assessments drive training culture. I think theoretically, the ACFT, or the now AFT, is supposed to be kind of all of those. If you read different statements and messaging and things, they want a little bit of all of that. They want it to validly and reliably capture the fitness of people who take the test. They want it to guide future training. They want it to be predictive of outcomes, whether it's in combat or injuries. And they want it to drive a more holistic, higher performance training culture. We have to keep all those in mind in the background as we think about whether an event is good or not. I've rambled for a while. Back to you, Drew.
No, I was going to let you keep going because I know this is your specialty. Carry on.
Well, so then we have to ask those questions about the standing power throw. Does it assess the component of fitness accurately? So is it a valid assessment of total body explosive power? Does it encourage appropriate training? And this is where I start to have some issues. Like, we can question whether or not it's a great assessment of power. We're not going to make this a research episode. We've had some of these conversations before. I'll just briefly state that I think there might be better ones. Even look at other Army tests. The OPAT uses the standing broad jump and the chest pass. Both of those have been better researched and better validated than the standing power throw. Now, I'll admit I've gone way too far down the standing power throw rabbit hole. Most of the research calls it the backwards overhead medicine ball throw, bomb throw.
Bomb throw.
I did find today, because I'm reading some old Army technical reports on early testing of this, they initially called it the power ball throw. I missed that early on because it wasn't in the search terms I was looking for. But I was digging through a few of those. So that's does it validly assess the component of fitness question? Does it encourage appropriate training is the next question. This is where I have the biggest issue. And I'm not totally against standing power throw, actually. I think it is admittedly the only event on the test that really requires coordination and athleticism. And we probably want soldiers to be coordinated and athletic. The problem is I don't think they're going and training coordination and athleticism, which that's hard to measure anyway. But I think they're just practicing standing power throws. Mm-hmm. You can develop power lots of ways. I don't think practicing the technique of the power throw is the right one. And this, now I'm getting off track, but I missed explaining the difference between face validity and construct validity. Construct validity is how well does it assess the construct it's designed to assess, like how well does it assess total body power. Face validity is, to a casual observer, does it look like it assesses something relevant? I know that the standing power throw has poor face validity. Soldiers don't get it. You don't do that movement in combat. That does not make it an invalid assessment because it's not an attempt to simulate something in combat. It's an attempt to measure a component of fitness that contributes to performance in combat.
Yeah, but I think face validity carries a lot more weight in these things than researchers give credit to. It's kind of
I
like
think
the
so.
argument. It's like the subjective versus subjective data debate. Like, and I mean, I think I'm neither for nor against removing the power throw. What I find funny in like a dark humor kind of way is just how much time and effort went into justifying the entirety of the ACFT in the first place, and then just how quickly they were like, "Nah, fuck it, get rid of that."
Yeah.
It sort of flies in. It's the double speak that we talked about with the athletic trainers. It's like, come on, guys. Like, so there's, I mean, we can talk about, and Command Sergeant Major Harris did talk about, the data, but like truthfully, there just are people out there that have influence and power and just wanted to get rid of it. Now it's gone. And that's just the nature of things. And we've renamed the test, and that's great. But I think what's funny is those actions do sort of discount the years and years and years of technicality that went into the ACFT, which, again, in my opinion, the ACFT in and of itself was probably a little bit too research heavy. I think it gave too much credence to construct validity versus face validity. But I understand the why behind that. It's so you can justify every piece of it, so that when somebody fails or arguments come up in Congress, you can point to research and whatever. But it just makes it funnier to me that here we are in this political climate. Somebody just didn't like the power throw, now it's gone.
And I will defend the power throw briefly. And people have seen my Instagram post. I did a little bit of a lit review on it, some things like that. We talked about it in the previous, this episode will come out multiple episodes after Sergeant Major Harris. But there is research somewhat questioning the construct validity of the standing power throw. But if we trust the Army's own internal testing and we look at the BISPR's stuff and we look at the RAND assessment of the BISPR's stuff, it is worth stating clearly that during some of the early testing, the sled drag, 2-mile run, power throw, and deadlift, just those 4 events accounted for the vast majority of the variation in performance on the simulated combat tasks. The other events that were incorporated, the leg tuck, sled push, 300-yard shuttle, and push-ups, when you add those 4 additional events in, barely improved the overall predictive ability of the test to determine how people would perform on a simulated combat task. Some people might notice that I mentioned some events that aren't in the test there: 300-yard shuttle run, sled push, and pull. Those were later just kind of merged into the sprint drag carry. The sprint drag carry itself wasn't really used in the initial studies with the combat task simulation. That was an after the fact Frankensteining of a few different things.
Do you see that going away?
The sprint drag carry? No, because it has fantastic face validity, even though it has kind of shitty construct validity. Like Drew and I have talked about this at length. A 300-yard shuttle run would just objectively be a better assessment of anaerobic capacity by itself.
Mm-hmm.
When you start doing a whole bunch of things at once, you don't know what somebody's limiter is. Why are we doing a sled drag with a weight that's like a third what a realistic combat sled drag would be? Why are we doing a carry for like a weight and distance that isn't really challenging for anyone?
What are we doing?
Whatever, that's aside the point. But like that, despite all those things undermining the construct validity of the assessment, it doesn't matter because it has great face validity. People get it. It looks like combat tasks. Hell yeah. So that comes back to your thing about how much does face validity really matter?
Mm-hmm. I've been thinking a lot about this since we talked to Command Sergeant Major Harris about the test. Like, why are we not measuring grip strength? That is such a well-researched marker for not only like performance, but also wellness, longevity, all the things. And it'd be so easy to do.
Disagree.
Please disagree with me.
I think you're falling into a Goodhart's Law trap. I think grip strength correlates with a ton of things.
Fair
I think
enough.
Training grip specifically doesn't move the needle on those things.
That's Alec Blennis' argument.
I'll shout out Ben Gleason, I think is his name, one of the H2F directors. He put up a post about this. We don't really have any research that I've seen. And if I'm not mistaken, he was trying to do this research and got squashed by the powers that be. But what we don't have any research on is if you train to improve the standing power throw, does that training improve your performance on the simulated combat tasks? That we don't have an answer to on any of these events, really. I think superficially, well, no, that's not true. I believe there's enough data to say that if you improve your 2-mile run, you're going to improve on these things because you necessarily improved your aerobic capacity. And I would expect similar with the deadlift. Notably, and I'm going to go off on like a weird tangent here that I've been thinking about a lot the last 48 hours because it just like clicked in my brain recently. I would expect diminishing returns as you train for any event, right? Like if you take your deadlift from 100 pounds to 200 pounds, you're going to get a lot better at a lot of things. If you take your deadlift from 200 pounds to 300 pounds, you're still going to get better, but probably not as much as the difference between 100 and 200. And that continues on, right? If you take your deadlift from like, you're already deadlifting 450 and you get to 475, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference in most realistic daily life or combat tasks. That's just normal diminishing returns. In the aerobic capacity episode, we identified the same thing. The biggest benefit comes from the jump from the lowest percentile to the next lowest category, right? That's just how diminishing returns work. Whoever's nerdy enough, like me, go pull up the RAND review of the Army Combat Fitness Test and scroll to like page 61 or 62, where it has scatter plot graphs of how each event of the ACFT relates to performance on simulated warrior task battle drills, combat task stuff. It's called the WTBD-ST was the simulation they ran. And you'll notice all they did was fit these scatter plots to straight lines, only linear relationships. And I bet if you, a non-scientist like myself, not statisticians, look at those scatter plots, they look like they would fit much, much better to a curve that reflects diminishing returns in every single case, right? This is true of the standing power throw. I think we would get a better predictive value if we assumed that the data followed that diminishing returns pattern. Incidentally, it's also extremely true for the leg tuck. We threw the leg tuck out because it doesn't explain a lot of the performance. Really, we threw it out because people struggled with it. Forget the data. Nobody made a decision based on data. They just got mad.
I thought soldiers rise to the occasion and pass all the things.
We'll leave that aside. But if you try to fit it to a straight line, it doesn't work really well. But there's like a really steep vertical line on the left side of the graph where if you do 0 leg tucks, if you could not do a leg tuck, it is highly likely that it took you more than 15 minutes to complete the simulated combat tasks. If you did 10 leg tucks or more, it is extremely likely that it took you less than 15 minutes to complete the combat task. So if we draw that curve, there's a non-failure threshold around 1-ish leg tucks because it's really steep at the beginning. Going from 0 to 1 leg tucks makes a huge difference. And then that curve smooths out between 1 and like 10-ish. So I think it was actually pretty predictive. I think we just couldn't quite handle the math required to draw a curve instead of a straight line. And I'm pretty heated about this one and looking forward to some conversations with people who know more about stats than I do.
I mean, we've talked about testing, our thoughts on testing. It's so interesting that this decision was made without seemingly consulting anybody that knew anything about human performance.
Which tells you exactly how much they really care about all this research and data.
Right. Which very quickly becomes a nihilistic argument of like, what are we doing?
Quick note, and then I'll go into my conspiracy theory. I have heard a few comments about like we had to get rid of the standing power throw because of too many acute injuries from people doing the standing power throw and hurting themselves. I just don't agree at all.
I was going to say, what?
That exact thing was said about introducing the deadlift to testing. Like, oh, we're going to have an epidemic of horrific back injuries with everybody just discs flying out everywhere, left and right. Everybody's crippled. Just didn't happen. If the prospect of throwing a 10-pound medicine ball over your head is like scary to you or like makes you worried that you're going to hurt yourself,
You shouldn't be in the Army.
yeah, I'm worried about you, right? Like you are fragile,
Yeah.
right? And we should train in a way that gets rid of that fragility first.
I'm trying to think of a good acronym, like anti-fragile fitness
Yeeting Club?
anti-fragile something. I want it to be inappropriate. I'm a big fan of that concept because, like, again, I know we've kind of gone back and forth. What would your ideal test look like? Like, I think there's an argument to be made for power being tested. I mean, the broad jump makes sense, but that's such a pain in the ass to test.
Broad jump's less of a pain in the ass to test than the standing power throw.
Well, you just get into issues with, like, what if you land and fall forward, and what if you, like, all the things. It's just harder to measure.
We did it every master fitness trainer course. We tested every student on a standing broad jump. It's distinctly easier to accurately measure that than it is a standing power throw. Where
Actually, that's a good point. That's
a specialist is wandering in a field with a yardstick and just points
Yeah.
at where they like generally think
Or
the
they
ball
think it
landed.
went. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think so. Aside from just is it a good metric or not, I'm a big proponent of things that require you to train effectively into later stages of life. I mean, the power throw, like, okay, cool. Say it's a broad jump. I mean, if you're 40, 50, older than 50, and I know some service members are, you gotta have your shit locked down to be able to complete those types of events. And so I think that just logically then creates more robust, resilient, anti-fragile people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, to get to that level of just like testing legitimacy, you're going to have to leave some people behind. And I think that's where the military has a tough time with that because they don't want to leave people behind. Anyway.
Conspiracy theory time?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I don't know if this is the case. I cannot read senior leaders' minds. I don't know what conversations happened.
Hold on. Let me preface this. Gang, last night I was in bed, maybe 10 p.m.
It was like 9:45.
It was late. Alex is a couple hours behind me.
Note that it is only 7:45 my time. It's not as weird as it sounds.
But you guys have listened to Alex for a while. He's a smart dude. He knows how clocks work. He knows what time it is over here. He texts me, "You up?" Not even
that was an intentional "you up." Yeah.
Not even YOU. Just a "you up."
Yep.
Quick conspiracy theory call, but it can wait for tomorrow. And I said, "Text me the deets." And did something happen? And you go, "Not really." But I looked at ACFT data and I responded, "That's the most 10 p.m. text from Alex text I've ever received." Then I went to bed. So I saw that because you've been sitting on this conspiracy theory now. Like, please unload.
Okay. So at this point, we know the Secretary of Defense put out a memo that says in this process of reviewing combat fitness standards, no standards can be lowered. Now, one could debate whether removing the standing power throw is lowering a standard just by taking it completely away. But certainly they could not have kept the standing power throw and set a lower minimum. Like that would have been an explicit violation of the Secretary of Defense's guidance. So as we transition to sex-neutral combat standards for the 21 identified close combat military occupational specialties, any event we keep has to go to at least the current men's minimums. Now recall, for those combat MOSs, it's a 350 overall, so you have to average 70, but you only have to hit the minimum of 60 in each event. So when I did this quick analysis, I looked at the 60. You could look at the 70, and that makes the situation even worse, but we can assume people get some points in other events. If you look at that original BISPERS data, again, the easiest way to look at it is the plots provided in the RAND independent review of the ACFT. They graph each event. We were talking about this a second ago. I think they fit better to a curve than they fit to a straight line, but we're ignoring that for a second. On the standing power throw, almost no one, male or female, failed the lowest minimum standard, right? The bare minimum. Basically, nobody failed that. However, that does not account for the gold, gray, black standards we had where combat MOSs were higher. It doesn't account for the fact that later on we did some gender norming and age norming of the test. So now we got to redraw that line using the 17 to 21-year-old male standard on the standing power throw, the current one, now that we've normed it, and that's what we're going to. And I'm going to scroll back to it just so I can look at it as I talk about this. 17 to 21-year-old males have to throw 6 meters, in that age category. It actually goes up until you get into the 32 to 36 age category where it's at 6.5 meters, but we'll stick with 17 to 21 for now. If we slide the minimum standard line on the graph Rand provided over to 6 meters, all of a sudden we're at a point where almost no men are failing, literally only one on the chart, but nearly half of the women are now failing. So my conspiracy theory is they gathered in their conference room. They looked at what are the consequences if we go to these sex neutral standards for combat MOSs. And they said, wait a second, if we move the line over, a lot of women in combat roles are going to get cut for the standing power throw. And that's why they threw it out. That's that shitty use of data I mentioned before, where we're not establishing a standard and letting people get to it. We're bulldozer parenting them, right? We're removing the obstacle before they get the chance to contend with it. Now, I will acknowledge the exact same thing happens on the sprint drag carry graph as well. If we shift to a 60 or 70 point 17 to 21-year-old male standard, once again, that doesn't really affect very many men, but it does cut somewhere in the neighborhood of half of the women. Why would they do it on the standing power throw and not do it on the sprint drag carry if there's the same situation happening? I think it's because the data I'm looking at is pretty old. It's from early pilot testing of ACFT stuff. People making decisions at Army headquarters can look at current data of people who were taking ACFTs that mattered. It affected promotions, retention, things like that. So they were trying harder. I also think training for the sprint drag carry is pretty intuitive. You do some lunges, you do some 300-yard shuttles, you do some 400s, things like that. You get better at it. As we've discussed on this platform before, training for explosive power is a little bit less intuitive, especially if you come from an Army background. You like short sets of just a few reps followed by long rest periods, maximal intent on every single rep. That's not stuff that comes naturally to the Army. The Army likes super high rep calisthenics, train to failure, all that kind of stuff. I think people have probably improved more on the sprint drag carry over the last couple of years since the data I'm looking at. And I bet they haven't improved as much on the standing power throw because they don't really know what training to be doing to get better at it.
I mean, it sounds legit, but we'll have to see if it comes out in a signal chat, I guess.
More to follow. We'll find out.
More to follow. Do you want to do gender neutral standards or no?
We don't really have any notes here, but as we kind of wrapped it into that conspiracy theory I had just a second ago.
I want to ask you, because people have asked me about it, and I'm sure they have with you as well, specific to the conversation we had with Command Sergeant Major Harris. And I believe it was you who asked him the question, if you're going to gender norm, why would you not age norm? And they're just basic. There wasn't like a good answer. What do we think about that?
We're going back to conspiracy theories. I can't read the minds of senior leaders. I have no idea how the solution was ultimately determined. I am guessing it's the same scenario we just described a second ago, where they looked at charts and they probably looked specifically at key leaders, senior leaders, sergeants major, colonels. And if it's anything like the original ACFT issues, we're specifically talking about key leaders in some of the more technical fields, medical, lawyers, things like that. And they realized that there would be a bloodbath amongst those communities if they did not age norm it. That is my guess. But as you pointed out, Sergeant Major Harris and every leader I've talked to who's at a senior rank probably outperforms most of their junior soldiers under them, right? Like they should have no problem with it. They've been training this way for a long time.
Well, it's
that
just
decision
one of those things,
doesn't
like,
matter. It's doublespeak stuff, right? Like he says that's
right.
the case, and we're supposed to believe that's the case. Then you wouldn't have age normed it.
Well, then there's two things, and I don't mean to keep bashing him, but like I believe the answer to the question about gender norming it had to do with, the classic rebuttal of like, oh, the enemy doesn't care if you're a guy or girl. It's like the enemy also doesn't give a shit if you're 25 or 60.
Yeah,
you're going to get shot at. But then it goes against the whole argument of like, oh, soldiers will just meet the standard. does that not hold true once you hit a certain age threshold? Like, are you no longer interested and or able or capable? So what's interesting to me is I genuinely think that service members would be fine if senior leaders just sort of admitted, like, hey guys, this test, like, this is hard. We can't
Yeah.
do it, but our job doesn't require us to do it. I think if we were just transparent about that, it might be okay. I think that everybody that is actually in the trenches, quote unquote, like shooting at the bad guys, fundamentally understands that the dude 6 ranks up who's telling him what to do, like, he doesn't need to have the same. So I think when we just
I would suggest
pretend,
something different.
please.
I would suggest that, and this goes back to ACFT 1.0, which like
Ooh, the histories.
we established standard, and like, does everybody agree with the criteria and reference standards and how they were developed? No. I think there's work to be done on establishing exactly what types and levels of fitness are needed, potentially in different occupations, maybe for soldiers in general. Who knows? I kind of liked the gold, gray, black stuff. It made sense. But I think what we need to do is identify why these are the standards and stick with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you establish that high standard and built the appropriate culture around it and taught people how to train for it, people like soldiers would do what Sergeant Major Harris said and rise to the standard. You just never gave them the chance to. I mentioned the concept of bulldozer parenting earlier. Everybody's heard of helicopter parenting. Bulldozer parenting is where parents are on the lookout for any obstacles the kid might run into in life, and they knock them down before the kid gets there. It's based on the best intentions. You want your kid to have a comfortable, happy life. You don't want them to go through that suffering. But if you do that too much, you raise an adult who hasn't developed the resiliency to handle failure and try harder when they come up against something challenging. And I am genuinely worried, and I've written this in op-eds before, that the Army is bulldozer parenting its soldiers. It identifies a challenge that they should be able to overcome, and we're too scared of the readiness data consequences to give the force some time to adjust to and overcome this new challenge.
Which is crazy because we don't give a shit about that in the first place.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd still have athletic trainers.
Mm.
What are we doing, Alex?
I don't know. What I will say, I don't think we're going to go too deep on this. Conversation for another day, maybe. Hoping to get her on the podcast. We'll see. Shot her an email last night. But if you want to explore a good conversation on sex neutral, gender neutral fitness standards, I highly, highly recommend Kristen Greist's Founders Day speech at West Point. It was a few years ago from COVID times, from like ACFT 1.0 era. I will link it in the show notes. If you don't recognize the name, she was one of the first 2 women to graduate from Ranger School. She transferred to become an infantry officer. She talks about a whole bunch of things, but in particular, she talks about rising to the challenge. And I think if we're going to talk about sex neutral standards, everyone should probably listen to her comments. Mm-hmm. It's really good.
Do we have any stones unturned?
Yeah, I think we have a ton of stones unturned. I think we're going to return to these topics.
There's a lot of stones that are unturned.
I'm going to try and make an Instagram post that shows what I'm talking about with fitting the data to a curve with diminishing returns on the ACFT stuff. I have a strong feeling, as a guy who's done social media for a while, it's going to bomb. But for the 3 people who like enjoy that stuff, I will try to get that posted within the next few weeks.
There you go. Okay, cool. We'll close this out then. Team, thank you for stopping by. More to follow. If you have any other takes or relevant events you want our hot takes on, please let us know. And yeah, see you next week.
Cheers.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsandmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.